This has got to be one of the most important videos we have ever released about becoming a success in trading. This will be the last video we do that is following on from the Great Trader series, where we introduced a lot of the ideas about building talent in trading. So if you haven't seen that series yet, it's just 3 videos and I think it's absolutely essential viewing. The links are all down below. I often get asked what I'd do differently if I had to start learning to trade all over again. Well, I think for certain, the one thing I wish I knew back then are the things I spoke about in that video series and what we're about to discuss in this video. Because that's what I think is the real key to becoming excellent in anything, not just trading, but anything at all. So we're going to be discussing today the topic of deliberate practice, specifically for trading, and how this is the key to progressing towards becoming a successful and consistent trader. Now, although this is a topic that's been discussed by many psychologists, writers, and educators, including Malcolm Gladwell, Angela Duckworth, Carol Dweck, Daniel Coyle, Matthew Said, and many others, we're just going to be referring to the seminal work on this topic by Anders Ericsson, based on the extensive studies that he did. I'll be talking you through the 3 different types of practice and ultimately explaining how you can adapt the correct type of learning into your trading development sessions. Obviously, there are so many different areas of trading, so I can't give you examples of how to do this for every single area, or we'll be here all day, but I will give you some examples and guidelines which should help you to figure out how you can adapt this for whatever area of trading you're focusing on and learning at the moment. And even things outside of trading too, it applies for them as well. Now, I'm really excited about how this is all going to improve your progress dramatically. So let's get going. In the late 1970s, Ericsson conducted an experiment with an undergraduate student named Steve. His aim was to see if he could work with Steve to improve his memory beyond what people typically see as being humanly possible. He would read out a string of numbers, with each number in the string being read out 1 second after the other. This would therefore force Steve to be using his short-term memory rather than his long-term memory to process these numbers, and therefore be restricted by what we see as our natural limitations. The average amount a human can hold in an approach like this is a string of 7 numbers. However, after many months of working with Steve and progressing through various phases with different techniques being used and many frustrating times, Steve had absolutely smashed this average and could remember a string of 82 digits. Wow, luckily it looks like student Steve won't be forgetting a girl's phone number on a student night out anymore. Although this exercise was focused solely on developing memory, it came with some important lessons. Firstly, Ericsson had used something which many people believe to be a natural limitation and something which couldn't be developed with any type of practice. So not only did he debunk that idea, but he also had a set of principles that he could apply to the learning of anything. And in fact, when he did apply the same methods to the practice of other tasks, he found that the same principles applied. In fact, quite interestingly, he also found that famous geniuses from various other fields had also followed these principles in one way or another. And this was, of course, deliberate practice. Ericsson identified 3 different types of practice: naive practice, purposeful practice, and deliberate practice. So naive practice, or ordinary practice as we refer to it as in the Great Trader series, is what most people will typically do. Remember, we gave the example of someone driving a car? You could be driving for 20 years, but it doesn't mean that you'll be better than a racing car driver of only 5 years experience. Because once you've passed your test as a driver, you'll usually start to engage in this naive practice, this ordinary practice, which involves many repetitions of the same thing, often mindless and not challenging at all. This can happen with people learning anything, including trading. For example, once you've learned how to do certain things with your trading to a certain extent, you'll probably be doing these things under naive practice conditions from then on. Sort of like doing it in autopilot mode without really progressing, just mindless repetitions over and over again. However, the next phase of practice is purposeful practice. This is what Ericsson identified initially from his studies of Steve and his number memorizing task. There were some specific factors that contributed to his extraordinary development and ultimately led him to memorizing 82 digits in one go. Now, essentially, like I said, there are some basic factors that make up purposeful practice. These are having a clear and specific goal, being completely focused during practice without distractions and without entering a mindless autopilot state. And this also means that you need to be able to maintain motivation. constantly pushing outside of your comfort zone to achieve new things, being able to monitor progress and instantly receive feedback after each attempt of the task. This is a really important phase in the learning process and is the required foundation before we can then upgrade this type of practice to the next stage, which Ericsson referred to as the gold standard, which is of course deliberate practice. So before I explain that one, let's first of all see how we'd fit our trading into this model of purposeful practice. We would do this by breaking down our trading into the specific thing we're learning about. Remember, we need to have a specific and clear goal. So an important first step is to create some sort of practice plan where you're able to cover everything you need rather than trying to go through everything all at once, because that would not be a clear plan. So imagine today you're learning about trend lines. Your clear and specific goal might be to learn how to draw trend lines correctly in a way that will be obviously identifying the correct significant level in the market. Next, you'll need to make sure you're focused and without any distractions. Easier said than done. This means locking yourself away somewhere, away from other people and potential distractions. No phone with notifications, no email notifications, no monitoring news, no TV, nothing. Except maybe you might want to use some music or some sort of white noise to help you block out any external stimuli. And in fact, we have a video coming soon on the right music to help aid your trading. But basically it's something without any lyrics and not too in your face while you're working. Now, maintaining motivation during this process will have to come from yourself. In most other activities, you can have a coach who helps you with maintaining motivation through shouting at you or being nice or showing you the right way. But in the case of trading, it's likely to be that you're going to be on your own. So the motivation will need to come from within. You may recall the lesson on grit in trading. The link to that video is in the description box below. And this is an important point, an important lesson to consider and to remember at this stage. Next, you'll want to be following a plan for your learning, but to be constantly pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. So for example, you might start by just drawing all the trend lines you can on a particular area of the chart. Then you might want to start working in other exercises, such as finding a reversal point on the chart and then aiming to find any possible trend lines that could have been involved in that reversal taking place, so using retrograde analysis. Next, you want to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, where maybe at this point you'll start to time yourself drawing a certain amount of trend lines. For example, you may time yourself and say, I need to do 20 trend lines in 1 minute. You can then alter this to make it faster or slower, more challenging, easier, depending on how you got on with that first task. Then move to going ultra slow, spending a lot more time on just one trend line, really focusing, looking at it for like 5 minutes to check every possible touching point, every possible variation of that angle, taking notes of all the different aspects that led you to that decision of keeping it where it is. And after that point, you may then want to start to incorporate some trading based on the levels. So you push yourself outside your comfort zone again with the pressure of some competition of the live market, although obviously using a demo account at this stage while you're learning. Or perhaps spending some time observing a particular trend line in the live market and tallying how many times the price interacts with it during each candle that comes close. So the candle comes close to the level, you tally how many times it touches it, and this will mean that you're entirely focused on the action that's taking place at that point in time, so you're really understanding and improving. Next, you obviously need to be able to track your results and get feedback. Well, luckily for us, this is straightforward in the market, especially with using an approach like the Duomo method, where we can use type 1 and type 2 closes to identify a correct significant level. This means you can instantly get feedback from the market about whether your trend line was drawn correctly or not, especially if you start by using a faster time frame like the intraday time frames, so the results are going to come a lot sooner for you. You can then keep track of how many times your levels were correct in a week or in a month or a day or whatever, although obviously bearing in mind that the tools are based on probabilities in any case, and sometimes you may have drawn it correctly and it still may not be respected. So just bearing that in mind, but still tracking what your results are like with that particular tool that you're using, in this case trend lines. So have a think about how you can use this approach for the other elements of your trading as well. If you're dedicated to progressing to a world-class level, you should spend some time to actually create some sort of training plan for each and every element, just like you do in any other activity. Or at the very least, having a plan before you sit down for a practice session. And even if you are a consistent trader, this is an important thing to do to make sure you're continuing to improve and not just stagnating, even if you're using a method that's different to the one that we're teaching you on this channel. This is essentially what Ericsson did with Steve trying to memorize the numbers. They had tried different techniques coming from different angles, including speeding up the time from 1 second between each digit to something much quicker so that Steve would have to adapt to having a quicker processing time, or sometimes making it much slower so he had more time to process, more time to think about it, and that way he could prove to himself that it was possible and therefore he could stay motivated to increasing that time. Or grouping the numbers differently in his mind from 3 number sequences to 4 number sequences, and so on. Basically, one of the critical ways he was able to keep progressing was to find new angles to tackle problems in his development and to overcome sticking points. And for this, one essential point was to have Ericsson coaching him, which brings us on to the gold standard of learning: deliberate practice. One of the key factors Ericsson identified for deliberate practice was that it had to be in a well-developed field, where the best performers needed to be far superior to the rest of the people just entering that field. Now, I don't know about you, but personally I think that trading definitely hits this criteria, since we know that the majority of traders actually lose money rather than becoming profitable, let alone consistently profitable. In addition to that, deliberate practice should also be based on using maximal effort all the time. And it's not necessarily designed to be fun or enjoyable. At this point, it is pure work, 100% focus, maximal effort. However, Ericsson also points out that a critical point of deliberate practice is that it's necessary to have a coach to be able to provide you with the correct feedback. He says that if you imagine that you want to climb a mountain, you can see the summit in a distance and therefore you can have a very clear goal of where you want to get to. That gives you the chance to perform purposeful practice. However, if you want to be successful in making it there, your chances are improved by having a guide who can help you find the most optimal approach, the right methods and approaches, and to help you find an alternative route when you get stuck in certain areas. Because sometimes on your own it's difficult to really get the instant feedback that you need. Having results from the market is one thing, but having someone to tell you what you did right or wrong and correcting or suggesting an alternative approach is another thing altogether. And this is what really separates the purposeful practice from the deliberate practice. It's being deliberate in knowing exactly what you need to change and what you need to focus on. So our aim is to get as close to deliberate practice as possible. So for people learning the Duomo method, we have our forum where you can get instant feedback and get advice from me. And of course, we have our comment section on these videos here and on social media where you can get in touch with any questions you have or feedback that you need. However, obviously not everyone has access to our forum and not everyone wants to learn from me anyway. So if you can't get involved in deliberate practice, you'll just need to stick with purposeful practice instead. Or alternatively, you could try to get as close to deliberate practice as possible through imitation. For this, you'd need to identify who the experts are in your fields that you would actually want to learn from. You can then try to break down their approach and find what they're doing exceptionally well, and then try to figure out how they're actually doing this. You may be able to even look in interviews they've given or things that they've done or said in the past that shows how they themselves have learnt and any resources that they used. You can then design purposeful practice approaches that imitate this as close as possible and just find other ways to gain feedback through other means. Yes, it's not quite the gold standard, but it's a long way better than naive practice. And remember guys, none of this is going to happen overnight. As we said in the Great Trader series, it's often believed that it takes 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to become world class at something. Now, I personally believe, based on other studies that I've seen, that you can become exceptionally talented at something in a much shorter amount of time than that. But there is absolutely no substitute for being in this purposeful or deliberate practice state. So, take some time to create some learning plans and let's get going. If you're stuck on how you can perform purposeful practice for a specific aspect of your trading, leave a comment below and we can all try to come up with some ideas of how this can take place. If you like this video, please do leave us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for much more about trading, investing, financial education in general and much more. Oh, and of course, don't forget to join our free Inner Circle mailing list. The link is in the description box. And by doing this, you get access to our 4-part video mini-series teaching you the foundations of our method so you can learn all about how we do what we do. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.